Well, today we're in week 4 of our series called Too Casual. We're looking at the characteristics of God and how sometimes as followers of Jesus, we can be too casual in our relationship with God and we can kind of miss his character and his attributes. And as a result, it leads us into, that misunderstanding leads us into sin and its consequences in our lives. And today we're talking with Pastor Chris, we're talking about the compassion of God. And some people might be surprised to hear that God is compassionate. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is to see that that's what God says about himself. When we look at these attributes and these characteristics, it's who God says that he is. In Exodus chapter 34, Moses is longing to see God. And God reveals himself to Moses and he says, Moses, I am a compassionate God, slow to anger, the God, compassionate. And so he marks himself as being just that.
Yeah, in the context of sending Moses in to rescue his people who've been in slavery for 400 years. So some of you watching this today, maybe you need to hear this of all the messages we've been covering in this series. This might be the one you need to hear because maybe your picture of God isn't one of compassion. Your picture of God might be one of, he's this stern, angry, mean God, but God says he's compassionate.
Yeah, it's interesting too because shortly before this, the people were doing their own thing. Essentially, God had been leading them out through Moses and they were not satisfied. So they had built a statue to worship.
Right.
And God, even when he should have been just, he says to Moses, I'm compassionate.
Yeah, that's good.
That's interesting.
Okay, so then what you say is that God's compassion, and this is important to understand, not just about the word compassion, but also about God's version of compassion. The ultimate version is that his compassion is costly. There are a few stories in the New Testament that talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we see Jesus, the ultimate sacrifice is that God would send his son for us, right? But Jesus, in his interaction with people, he felt deep compassion for them. There's a Greek word, splanchnizomai, which literally means that within your stomach, almost like your bowels are moving, like you have a gut ache for people. And Jesus has this with them. The story of, when he touches the leper in the New Testament, he goes up to them and it says he had splanchnizomai, compassion, and so he touched them. And just after John the Baptist was beheaded in Mark 14, he comes back to go out to be alone. And there's people all surrounded and he steps off the boat and it says that he had compassion and he began to heal them. Another time there's several blind people just saying, God, Jesus, the Christ, would you heal us, help us to see? And splanchnizomai, he felt for them and he had compassion on them and he healed them.
Yeah, we'll put links to those texts that Chris is mentioning down below so you can talk about this with your small group. But Chris, I want to end with this thought. So this whole series, we're talking about God's characteristics, but then we're talking about how that impacts us as followers of Jesus. So what is compassion? What does the fact that God is compassionate mean for us as followers of Jesus?
I think it's tricky here because there's empathy and there's compassion. I might see someone on the side of the road with a flat tire and I can say, oh, that really sucks. I can have empathy for them, but if I don't do something about it, I'm not showing them compassion. And I think, as Jesus demonstrated compassion, there was action. He did something. And I think for us, when we experience God's compassion, it should then, as followers of him, should spur us on to be compassionate to other people, to not just be empathetic or feel bad for people, but to really show compassion and do something about it. I think oftentimes we get comfortable. We've seen starving children and we feel bad for them, or, we see a hurting family member or a coworker and we just say, man, that really sucks. But what are we doing to show compassion? What action step are we doing? And I think this can spur us on to help.